and welcome to No Off Season. I'm Zena.
I'm Sabreena Merchant.
And I'm Ben Pickman.
And today on the show, we talking money, folks, particularly Caitlin Clark's money. Caitlin Clark's salary in the WNBA is $78,066 a year, but what is she really worth to the sport? We're going to get into it and the dollars of the cents of it all and see if it makes any sense. And we're also going to be talking about CBA negotiations, expansion, NBA ties, media rights, and a whole lot more. But first, we got to talk about a whistleblowing. Yes, throughout the WNBA season, we know people have been feeling away about the officiating. It's not anything new. We've also discussed that on this pod before, but it got a little bit louder and louder. And on Sunday night, the Sky's 5-point loss against the Minnesota Lynx, Angel Reese added her voice into the conversation. Let's hear what she had to say.
Yeah, I think we fought really hard. It's tough when you talk to officials and I ask them, hey, we've only been to the free throw line twice up into the fourth quarter, and she tells me it's not her job. So I know it's frustrating because I know how hard we're battling inside, and obviously we know we can compete with the best, but that has to be fixed. And I don't give a damn if I get fined because that shit cheap, and I am tired of the shit because I've been nice and I've been humble with it, but I am tired of the shit.
All right, guys. If you guys watched that game, Angel was pretty heated, and it was understandably so. I've been covering the Valkyries. I've seen Natalie Nakase get her first tech in her coaching experience, as a head coach at least. And I understand that people are upset, but what do you think happened in that game that brought out this moment for Angel?
The first thing is just the disparity in the number of foul shots the Sky took relative to the Lynx. The Sky took 8 free throws and the Lynx took 17. And admittedly, the margin is pumped up a little bit because it's a close game and you're fouling at the end. But, more than double the amount of free throws is going to set off an opponent, especially when you're a player like Angel Reese, who does most of her work in the paint, right? Like, this is where fouls get called. This is where you earn free throws. And so for, Angel to come out of that shooting single-digit free throws when she's, working so hard to create space in the lane, I think is mostly what led to that frustration. I mean, there are a lot of pictures that came up of, her just getting like sandwiched by like Alana Smith and, another Lynx player. And there's just a lot of contact being allowed. And I think we've seen just a general rise in frustration over the amount of contact league-wide, really, that's been allowed by referees this season.
Yeah, I mean, we saw arms wrapped around her. It was rough. But Ben, are we hearing any changes in the ways that, officiating is going to be handled in the WNBA? What's word on the street regarding this issue?
Well, the Chicago Sky would say they didn't even have a change between that game against Minnesota and their game against Washington earlier this week because they lost that game by 2 points. And afterwards, Tyler Marsh said that basically two things can be true, that they both put themselves in a position to lose, by 2 points to Washington. But at the same time, Marsh said to have a chance at the end was robbed from us. And basically what happened was, with 2.8 seconds remaining, Elizabeth Williams was called for a foul on Shakira Austin, a call that Chicago couldn't challenge and they were not very happy with. So to your question of are things changing, I would say the answer right now is no, Zena. Not for Chicago and not for other coaches around the league who continue to voice frustrations, about, crunch time foul calls, about I think technical foul and kind of flagrant foul enforcement has been something I've kind of heard and, heard in passing comments from coaches about why they're called for a technical. They're not really sure. Some people say they basically say nothing and still get texts. Like, again, we only get one side of the story on this usually because we're only talking to players and coaches. We don't talk to officials in the same way we talk to that other party. But still, it seems like there are still the inconsistencies we've seen for years, and the officiating complaints are don't seem like they're going away anytime soon.
Well,
Yeah,
at
'cause
least
it doesn't
Angel
just
went
seem to
from
be-
2 free throw attempts to 15 in that second game. So some
Sure.
things changed.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it does feel like, again, the conversation is being made by the fans. It's being made by players. Obviously, you just mentioned Tyler Marsh. I've mentioned Natalie Nakase. Like, who else has been out loud speaking about just how tough the officiating has been to not only consume as a product, but to experience as a player or coach?
I was talking to one unnamed general manager. It was an expansion discussion, and I was asking just like, about the league having the resources to sustain 5 more teams over the next 5 years. And they said, can we just fix reffing first? I was like, I mean, I wasn't asking for that, but
Facts,
it is
though.
a topic of
Facts.
discussion.
Okay. All right. So it's top of mind, clearly. So hopefully, I don't know. Do we think the commissioner is listening to us? Maybe. You never know. She could be a fan. Uh,
She's definitely listening to
we
Angel, I'll
welcome
tell you
all,
that.
right? This is definitely an issue that we're seeing. I don't know if it's going to go away until there are more refs, there are more formal trainings, etc. I know the players would definitely want it, but definitely something to look forward to um, for the league to improve. But in other news around the WNBA, Dewana Bonner, who was waived by the Indiana Fever a few weeks ago, she is now signed dun, 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 with the Phoenix Mercury. Are we all surprised? Probably not. We're going to see how that's going to impact this team, especially because this team is playing really well and really connected and flowed really well. So this is a new face in a new space that also demands a lot of attention. DeWanna Bonner is an awesome player. And so fitting her into this already scheme, I feel like she'll be able to play a good role, but it's just going to be a matter about folding her in. Asia Wilson left the Aces game against Liberty Tuesday night in the second quarter with a right wrist injury. And shout out to her team holding up the towels, making sure that she was protected in that moment. I thought that was pretty cool. As of this taping, she has not had her MRI, so we will see what happens there. And then on Wednesday afternoon, it was really Wednesday morning for me out here. That's why I'm in full face and makeup. After 5 games of being out with a groin injury, Caitlin Clark suited up against the Valkyries for her first game back on the court, and it did not go well for the Fever. They sustained a 19-point loss. And Caitlin Clark, you could see she was getting back. It was not the same kind of return you saw after New York when she came back from her injury earlier this season against New York, was dropping crazy amount of threes left and right. I feel like those Sandy Brondello rules are really starting to play into the way that people are guarding Caitlin and making sure that she is, tied up a little bit. But Fever are going to have to iron out a few wrinkles now that she is back. And now all-star teams are set. Ben slash Caitlin, Sabreena slash Fee. What do you guys think about these matchups?
Well, we saw Caitlin Clark got her Indiana Fever teammates. That was clearly a priority for her, and she certainly checked that box off. I think getting Sabrina Ionescu, another really exciting pairing that I'm excited to see personally, just like two lights out shooters pulling up from deep. I was a little disappointed that Caitlin had the opportunity to pick Paige towards the end of the starters section of the draft. And she admitted on the telecast that like she was going to do the nice thing basically and let Nafisa Collier end up with Paige, two UConn connections. But I think it would have been fun to see Caitlin and Paige also play together, knowing that opportunity was sitting there.
Yeah, I appreciated Caitlin's commitment to actually trying to build a real basketball roster and realizing the size deficiencies of playing Caitlin, Paige, and Sabrina all together in a starting
Who
lineup.
cares, Sabrina?
I think part of that was also in her mind when she, did the nice thing and let Nafisa have Paige. I mean, she obviously got her back and took Gabby Williams in the second round, so
Mm.
didn't let her have all the UConn girlies.
Yeah, I love the little picture of the like pro husky, baby husky photo of Fisa Collier and Paige. And Fee saying she can't wait to play alongside her. Very exciting, guys. Go read the breakdown in the newser on that. There's a lot of different themes you see throughout these two teams beyond just the UConn connection or the Fever connection that Zach Powell and Sabrina broke down. Okay. When we come back, we're going to talk about Caitlin Clark a little bit more. Not about that Fever game against the Valkyries. Nope, putting that in the past, just like I'm sure the Fever are. We got to talk about Caitlin Clark's value to the W. Okay, with a new collective bargaining agreement, or CBA, around the corner, franchise expansion exploding, money is a hot topic in the WNBA right now, to say the least. And recently, my expert co hosts have embarked on a reporting mission to figure out, based on how instrumental she's been in so little time, just how much Caitlin Clark really is worth to the WNBA, or at least to the world of women's sports in general. And how much should she actually be getting paid by the Fever? Because we know the 78,000 that she's getting paid right now in a rookie contract is not it. And it's important to note this, not just for Caitlin, because it does extrapolate to the rest of the league as well. This is what the players want to figure out in this collective bargaining agreement. They want their fair share of the value that they've started to generate. And the one player that is so visibly a part of that generation is, of course, Caitlin Clark. So, Ben, Sabreena, let's start with that top line. What did you find? How much is CC worth to the W? And, all things fair, how much should she really be making?
Yeah, so we had one source, one industry source, tell us that it's hard to believe that Caitlin is not worth close to $1 billion to the league. And then we had another,
With a
yes, a
B?
billion with a B. That is $1 billion. We had a Harvard
Wow.
economist tell us kind of more broadly as it relates to her value to women's sports that her overall value to women's sports starts with a B in the billions for sure. And that kind of insight draws on significant increases in media rights and franchise valuations over the past couple of years. WNBA franchises, their valuations are up 180% from 2024 to 2025, according to Sportico. Look at, franchise sales, not just in the WNBA, but across women's soccer, right? As another big example, the facility investments that teams are making across the board, new leagues like volleyball or what Athletes Unlimited is doing, just the amount of corporate partnerships that are flooding into the women's sports space. That all, it's not all to be attributed to Caitlin Clark, but the kind of buzz that she has helped to create, has obviously helped increase the value of not just the W, but just the ecosystem in general. And that is why, Zena, I'm glad you kind of prefaced it. Yeah, this is nominally a conversation, I guess, about Caitlin Clark and her value to the WNBA and women's sports. But so much of what Sabreena and I tried to do in this story was to kind of get into the marketplace and the ecosystem more generally. Like our reporting really tried to focus on, as you said, this CBA, media rights deals, like what is, in some ways limiting women's basketball players the ability to make the money that they might be generating. We start the story in kind of we make an analogy to Michael Jordan, kind of in the 1990s, where there was this famous study in which two economists said that what was Michael Jordan's value to the NBA at that time? And someone said that basically Jordan generated more than $50 million to other teams, which is more than $120 million today. Just again, looking at gate revenue, national TV and local TV viewership and revenue. So like we're trying to look at it all in the course of this conversation, not just focusing on that one player from Indiana.
Absolutely, because it is a factor of like, yes, it's Caitlin Clark, but Caitlin Clark has to play against all these other people. And of course, when you think about Caitlin, you think about the skyrocketing of her story. We think about Angel Reese that just covered the 2K, she's going to be on the 2K26 cover, right? This is another player whose market value has just exploded the marketplace. And when you think about all of the dollars to be had, Sabreena, in the marketplace, I think the number one people that are willing to spend money are the brands. And I can't tell you how many commercials I have seen with Caitlin Clark reading the bottom line at her optometrist from the logo, being able to say Sheboygan from her couch and the logo, right? I think about that State Farm commercial that we've seen a million times. The Gatorade commercials that don't just feature Caitlin Clark. Of course, they've got Asia Wilson as well, the Nike commercials with Sabrina Ionescu and the colorways that are coming out. I mean, there's so many different ways in which these players show up. The brands really have this job of pushing this forth and really pushing the consumerism tied to these players. So how are companies endorsements kind of putting a number on, let's start with Caitlin, but these players' values overall?
I just like back up on that for a second. I think the brand piece of it is so important because, we've had really big women's basketball stars before. You think about Arike Ogunbowale hitting 2 game-winning shots back-to-back in the Final Four, and she goes on this national media tour and is like on Ellen, and Kobe surprises her, and it's a huge deal. And she can't capitalize on that because she is an amateur athlete at that point, and the NCAA has a certain set of rules that define quote-unquote amateurism. And you think about Sabrina Ionescu and the draw that she had in her final season at Oregon, and unfortunately that tournament is canceled because of the COVID pandemic. So like there were big college stars coming up, and Caitlin just sort of happens to be perfectly timed to take advantage of all of these changing elements of this marketplace, right? You think about in 2021 is when NIL is allowed for college athletes. So that's when the brands get to come into play, right? That's when Gatorade and Nike and State Farm and all of these companies like Hy-Vee and the local Indianapolis and Iowa City economies can throw money at her and actually use her to promote themselves. And that's when, ESPN starts airing every single NCAA tournament game, so you can actually watch them play. And we know when you put things on television, people are going to watch them, right? Like, how hard was it to watch Asia Wilson in the tournament in her first early round games, or Breanna Stewart when she was winning 4 titles for Connecticut? It's so much easier now. You can see every single tournament game on ESPN now. And then you add that with the NIL and the fact that it explodes in this Caitlin versus Angel LSU Iowa game in 2023 that just rockets the sport and those two players onto the national stardom. I think there's just these factors that Caitlin was allowed to benefit from that previous generations were not. And a lot of it is she could just profit off her own name, image, and likeness, right? And that's what we're seeing now is these brands have a relationship with her already. And even as a second-year player in the WNBA, Nike's thrown all of this money at her. State Farm, like you mentioned. I mean, how many times do we see the State Farm commercial? It is probably the most viewed commercial in my home. For better or worse. I mean, the fact that we can say Sheboygan that clearly is probably a good indicator of how often we're watching the State Farm commercial. But that's a big part of it, right? Like, even if the WNBA can't, because of its own internal structures, pay Caitlin what she is valued to them, these other entities, like, Ben reported last year about her 8-year deal with Nike. I mean, in the 2024 calendar year alone, she's making $11 million reportedly from Sportico off of these endorsements. So there are other indicators that tell us, like, yeah, Caitlin is worth a lot to us. We will show her that money, even if the WNBA, because of its own constraints, can't do that right now.
And as you're speaking, I'm kind of getting chills because I'm thinking about, Cheryl Swoops becoming the first woman with a signature shoe deal with Nike, and that deal being worth $175,000. Right? I'm thinking about Maya Moore becoming the first woman to sign to Jordan Brand and thinking about what that deal could have been worth in today's age. And just again, the brands really kind of pushing this number up. But there are so many other factors than just the fact that these players are really cool. We all want to be like them. We want to look like them. We want to play like them. And so we want to buy things associated to them. There's actually other elements of the ways in which these players drive money. And I want to talk about like this $1 billion number. Of course, we think jersey sales, we think ticket sales, but Ben, what else? What feeds into that billion with a B?
Yeah, I mean, one, on ticket sales, I think first, we should say that we had someone tell us that, like, Caitlin Clark right now is making opposing owners 7 figures when she shows up. So just think about, the attendance draw that the Indiana Fever are, the amount of games that teams have relocated to bigger arenas just this week. We saw the Dallas Wings move basically their second game against Indiana to American Airlines in downtown Dallas. Clark did not play in the first game. People still, love the environment. People still filled it out. And now that Clark is healthy, presumably in the second half of the year, they're basically going to give it a second try, a second go around, and hope to have the same kind of effect. Ticket sales, big one. The opposing arenas, big one. You mentioned it. Media rights, though. Kind of Caitlin's role in media rights was one of the big questions we had as we reported out this story, because basically the WNBA, last year signed this new media rights deal that's worth around $200 million annually in what they're calling a tranche one, their first group of deals with Disney, ESPN, NBC, and Amazon. Just for context, the total value of the W's current media rights deal with all of its partners is around $50 million this year. So they signed this big deal that's worth around $200 million with these key partners. But in 3 years, when it goes into effect, actually starting next year, they're going to have this opportunity called a look-in, which basically is a provision for the league to renegotiate their core deals with these partners. And so the big question we had is then, what will the media rights deal be worth? We did get some interesting responses from both people who actually negotiated the current agreement, other experts in kind of the media rights space who said, it is hard to attribute a significant jump in media rights value to just one person. But take all that aside, WNBA ratings are significantly up in the regular season. A lot of these national telecasts, it seems like a weekly occurrence that, we get a press release in our inboxes that says, most watched game, second most watched game, third watched game, whatever. One of the big questions we have, though, I certainly have it, and I think Sabreena does too, is what will the postseason ratings continue to look like? Because for all the people out there who are listening, we appreciate you listening now. Continue to listen through the postseason and tell your friends to watch
Right.
postseason games if you really,
Right.
care about the future growth of this sport. Because for all the boom in the regular season, actually the postseason WNBA ratings still lag a little bit, kind of by comparison. And so that will be a really interesting determining factor in this new media rights deal. And again, in this conversation of like, how much is this new generation worth to the league?
And it makes sense. I mean, look at the timing of the postseason. It's right at the top of football season. It's at the top of kind of preseason for NCAA and NBA. It's a busy season, and it's MLB playoffs as well.
Totally.
So it makes sense that there's this confluence of all the things possible in the sports world to take your attention away right when you need the most attention on the WNBA. So let's talk a little bit more about revenue. Oh my God, if I could just have a conversation with the folks on the internet that don't get the difference between revenue and profit. Revenue and profit, folks. Remember, revenue is not profit. Money generated does not have anything to do with whether it's above the zero or below the zero. That's profit. Above the zero, not breaking even, you're above that, that's profit. Revenue is just money made, okay? That helps you get to profit, but very different. And the WNBA players are generating revenue. Profit is how the WNBA manages that revenue to get above that zero. And I feel like this is where things get a little bit interesting in how people perceive what the WNBA players are doing in terms of generating revenue. Now, a player like Caitlin helps generate a lot of revenue, but because it's not the league isn't as profitable, that's where people are saying, well, these players like Caitlin will likely never make what she's actually worth playing in the W. Now, let's get a little bit more into this because we've been talking about it lightly. We touched on it a little with Leja. We've been talking about it throughout. But now with this expansion team business, it's coming up even more. When you think about the NBA ties that the league has, that these teams have, and particularly, a lot of people like to do the one-on-one comparison of what the NBA players make versus the WNBA, or how the NBA salary is structured versus the WNBA. So let's break it down for our listeners. I am so excited for this because we need this, okay? Um, in the NBA players get 50% of basketball-related income, or BRI. Having worked at the Warriors before on the business side, I know that that means that is money that the players directly impact. Ben, you just laid out a lot of those. That's ticket sales, that's merch sales, that's media rights as well, league pass, all these different things. These are the things that if the players do not show up and play basketball, you cannot make real money off of that. All right, you can't sell jerseys for players that don't exist and aren't playing. It's not a thing. Maybe in other countries, I don't know. But you can't do it here. People want to wear the jerseys of the people that play, okay? So in the NBA, 50% of basketball-related income goes to the players. That is not their salary. They get a salary for lacing up their shoes and putting the ball through the hoop, or at least attempting to. Salary is different than the basketball-related income that shows up because they just happen to be playing. And then 50% of that goes to the owners. That is not the case in the W. Someone explain what is the case in the WNBA in terms of that basketball-related income split.
So first, we should take one step back and just explain the ownership structure of the WNBA. So the NBA owns the NBA, right? That's 100% of the revenue from the NBA goes to the NBA. The WNBA, 42% of the WNBA is owned by what you would consider the WNBA, which is the owners of the WNBA. And 42% of the WNBA is owned by the NBA, which is those 30 owners in that league. The remaining, it used to be a 50-50 split, but in 2022, the WNBA had a capital raise of $75 million that gave 16% equity of the league to the investors of that raise. So that's where we go down from 50% to 42% for each of those parties, and then 16% for this investor group. Now, that does mean that there are some people that are part of all three groups. Like, you have people like Ted Leonsis, who owns the Mystics, who owns the Wizards. That's WNBA and is also part of the capital raise group, right? So there are some people who double dip in parts of these. But the point is that there are three entities, right? You've got the NBA entity, the WNBA entity, and the capital raise group. So every dollar that the WNBA makes first has to be split within these three groups. So we're already at a deficit from the 50-50 thing because, 42 cents has to go to the NBA, 16 cents has to go to this capital raise group. And now we're left with 42 cents on this dollar. Even within that 42 cents, the players only get 10% of WNBA revenue. They're not even getting like half of that 42 cents. And that's because the WNBA has a different, let's say, revenue sharing model within its collective bargaining agreement. It is not defined as a 50-50 split. In the previous CBA, the 2021, it was an incremental revenue sharing model. So as the league hits higher revenue targets, the players receive a higher percentage of that revenue as the targets get higher and higher. The problem is, it is a cumulative revenue sharing model.
Thank you.
This
you,
CBA
Sabreena.
started in 2020. Now, you might remember something happened in 2020, which was a global pandemic. And that means the WNBA took place in a bubble season that year where you would recall there are no fans. So no gate revenue, no merchandise being sold at this arena. A lot of revenue. Right. Limited sponsors, fewer games, so less TV revenue, all of that. They basically did not make money during the 2020 season. They played a season just to exist in the sporting landscape so that they would not die out. Like Kathy Engelbert has basically said it was like an existential season they had to play just so they could continue playing their season. This was not a money-making operation. The next year in 2021, they're still mostly playing in empty arenas because of social distancing restrictions and things like that. So the targets that they were hoping to hit were just so woefully behind after 2020 and 2021 that all of the catching up that they've done in the past 2.5 years has not made up for that deficit. So the WNBA players have not hit those revenue sharing targets.
And it's also important, it's not only a cumulative revenue, it's cumulative on top of the fact that each year has to improve by 20%. So they have to almost basically do 2 years worth of revenue plus an extra 20% in each of these last 3 years to make up for what missed in 2020 and 2021. It's a losing game, y'all. Like, there's no way that they can do this. And that is what the basis of this, quote, fair pay campaign is from the WNBA or the WNPBA, the Women's National Basketball Players Association. They want fair pay. They want this structure that Sabreena just so beautifully laid out because, my God, I have tried. And I feel like I talked for 10 minutes. You just perfectly laid this out, where they want to relook at that structure and say, hey, we don't mind hitting benchmarks. That's fine. That's business. But can we hit benchmarks that make sense based on the situations around us? Particularly if we have a COVID season and then a COVID light season the next year, can we look in and try to reassess, restructure these benchmarks so that we can be paid based off of the revenue that we've generated? So now, Ben, you laid this out earlier too. If the players want to make more with this new CBA and they have the opportunity to look at this structure and say, hey, we want to be a part of this revenue that we've generated, where's the additional revenue going to come from?
Well, the revenue structure right now really seems to be one of the big hangups in the ongoing CBA talks. And a bunch of players that I've talked with and other reporters recently have talked with have really brought this to light. So the WNBA recently sent back a proposal to the WNBPA. And in it, among the things that players have highlighted, and we're talking Nneka Ogwumike, Kelsey Plum, Breanna Stewart, A'ja Wilson, like heavy hitters who are very much involved and in the know in these talks. What those players have said is that there was a fixed and small percentage kind of revenue sharing that the WNBA proposed. And basically, with kind of a fixed revenue sharing structure, and Nneka Ogwumike put it very clearly, like the players in their mind would not actually get to grow with the business, right? Because it would be the same percentage. And I should say, we don't currently know that percentage. We have tried to get specific numbers in terms of what that percentage was or how much the league is taking off the top or even what the kind of general salary framework is. We don't have specific numbers, but these players have said that, it's been this fixed percentage that will not basically grow over time. And so as a result, as the WNBA continues to grow, and it is a safe bet it is going to continue to grow if recent history is any indication. And if you want Exhibit A for that, just look at the Golden State Valkyries $50 million expansion fee and the 3 teams that were recently announced having a $250 million expansion fee. And players are saying, like, there's clearly money that is growing, and there's no reason to think that that is not the case. And so players are saying that, like, why then should this revenue sharing system not grow and evolve as the league's revenue evolves? And so that seems to be a pain point in these talks. Nneka Ogwumike said point blank to me and two other reporters, Annie Costable, Front Office Sports, and Doug Feinberg of the AP, that, like, they want the league to be what it is today and more. They want it to continue to grow, but the players in their mind want to grow with the league, and they don't think that is an unreasonable ask from their perspective.
Not at all. I mean, it makes sense. If you're contributing to the growth, there's a reason why that 250 exists. It's because it's worth it. And the fact that they were able to find 3 people willing to pay that money without a
More.
team, without a roster,
Think about all the
without
teams that were disappointed that they didn't get the bid, right?
that part too. Exactly. The teams and the cities that are waiting to be next in line, right? Like, there's value to be had. And so, yeah, an idea of a fixed number seems ridiculous. I had an off the record, kind of off casual conversation with a person that is a lawyer, asking them about this, like, in labor rights discussions, like, and a person that specifically has worked in the sports space. And they were like, this is something they cannot budge on. The players should absolutely not budge on. Of course, in the last CBA, you imagine, why would something like revenue sharing get left on the table to be a compromise, to be something that could be conceded? And you have to understand that in the 2020 CBA, folks, like, they were battling for dignity as players, right? We just talked about this with Leisure. They were battling for things for moms, for them to travel safely to their games. Like, it was basic things to be able to just arrive as a pro athlete and be treated well. And so this is an opportunity here. They do not want to mess this up because they know their worth, they know their value, and that's why they're going to be, really harsh about this. Satu Sabli even said this was a smack in the face. Whatever number they sent back, this was a slap in the face. So how are we likely going to see all of this come to a head with the new CBA that the players in the league are negotiating? Hopefully no more slaps in the face, but how do you move forward from that?
I mean, they're going to have this meeting in Indianapolis between the players and the league, where I think both parties, or at least the players certainly, are eager to talk in person, knowing that, often you can have more constructive in-person conversations than you can over Zoom. But it will be very interesting to see what comes out of this meeting because, as you mentioned, Satu Sabali said what she said. Brianna Stewart said that she was frustrated. I talked to Asia Wilson earlier this week, and she said that it actually took a toll on me. Was a quote from her.
Oh, wow.
Getting back and seeing the WNBA's proposal in response. She said that, quote, I kind of had to take a step back and observe if this is what we've been working so far for, right? Like, is this what we're truly being seen as? It just seems to continue to be a moment of epiphany, a moment of reflection for a lot of players. And in the story, we quoted this academic, David Berry, who's a professor of economics at Southern Utah University. And he says, quote, that the WNBA is hamstringed by this, referring to, kind of player salary conversations and also, I guess, the revenue split more generally. He says the WNBA is hamstrung by this because if they tell this amazing story of what's going on in their league in terms of revenue, then they have to explain why the players are paid so badly. And that is kind of this dissonance that is going on, right, between the players, the public, and the league and the owners. It goes back to what we were just saying. How can everything, be, that's obviously an exaggeration, but everything be a record? Merchandise, attendance, revenue, TV viewership. How can all these things be booming and there isn't more money to go around? That seems to be one of the big questions. We don't have access to the WNBA financials. Those are not publicly accessible documents, though I sure wish we did. But that really is the kind of question at the core of this negotiation. If everything is booming, then, like, why are salaries, are the way they are? Or why will the new proposal be what they is? Why is fixed revenue sharing in this proposal? What's the percentage? Why is it not a different percentage? Why is it not a different sharing system? Like, it all comes back to that dichotomy. If things are so great, then why are other things still not so great.
That, folks, is what happens when you put your foot in your mouth. If you're saying all this and then not allowing it to be shown through the numbers that the players that are contributing to that success, I mean, yeah, WNBA is definitely in a pickle if they don't figure this out. Now, before we close this out, I gotta ask Sabreena. uh, I've been hearing this. I know you've been hearing it. We've all been hearing it. This trope. Oh, the NBA subsidizes the WNBA, so they're never going to be successful because they're going to always owe their big brother. Like, why? Like, what? Why is it beneficial to the NBA that these players and the association and the league figure this out and ensure that the players are properly compensated?
I mean, it's a business, right? And in theory, if you want your business to do well, you have to support all of your employees in your business and make sure that they're performing at their top levels, that they're not, locking out and, not playing games for a certain amount of time, right? Like a work stoppage would obviously be incredibly detrimental to the overall business of the NBA and the WNBA. The thing is, like the relationship between the NBA and WNBA is incredibly difficult to parse because the leagues started as brother and sister leagues, right? Like every team was under the ownership of an NBA owner at the start, those 8 teams. And that model dissipated around 2003, where you started to get private ownership groups. I believe the Connecticut Sun were the first one. We've seen a very successful private ownership group in Seattle and Las Vegas that are independent of NBA teams. But there is still a lot of intermingling because so many teams are owned by their NBA owners as well. And the league, as we mentioned, is owned so much by the NBA, and so much of their operations is commingled between the two. Like you email WNBA officials and they have email addresses that say at NBA.com, right? Like everything works with one another. So the NBA is economically invested in the business of the WNBA. They quite literally profit, 42 cents off of every dollar, or I should say they get 42 cents of the revenue of every dollar that the WNBA makes.
Right.
Got to make sure to distinguish that. But how much
Very
they
good.
actually invest in the operations of the league is really kind of unknown, right? Like when we were talking to economists about how to parse through the revenue and where all this money is going, one of them said, like, I can turn a $4 million profit into a $2 million loss on a balance sheet. And every economist in the country would agree with me. Like you can finagle these numbers however you want
Absolutely.
based on what you consider operating expenses, right? And if Adam Silver goes out and says WNBA is losing $10 million a year, he could probably prove that even when the WNBA is generating revenue, right? Like it's all a matter of how you itemize what is going into the operations of the business and what is coming out. And unfortunately, we just don't have access to those balance sheets, right? Like we don't know exactly how much the NBA is putting into facilities or infrastructure or personnel at the league level. How much of that is coming from, the league level, how much that is coming from the owners themselves, right? So that's the tricky part with this, right? Like anybody can make their story work if they want to, if they sell the narrative the right way. But I think if the NBA is really invested in making the WNBA work, it probably behooves them to paint it as a slightly more successful business. Unless, of course, you're at the negotiating table with the Players Association and want to cry poverty so that you can say, oh, we have nothing to offer you in this particular instance.
Right.
And we should say, like, that tactic or, that phrasing, that is common across all sports. Like what Sabreena
Correct.
mentions about flipping, a big profit into a deficit. Like, I think it was actually a Major League Baseball executive. I want to say it was with the Blue Jays who kind of first coined that phrase or used that phrase because it can be applied in baseball labor context, hockey labor context, all across all sports. But what is so interesting, not just that there's an ongoing negotiation now, but this time in women's basketball, is that there's actually another league that doesn't have the same kind of collective bargaining restrictions, and that is Unrivaled. And I think we should mention that as we, continue to flesh out this conversation too, because Unrivaled, players last year received an average of more than $200,000 in salary for a 10-week season. But they also received equity in the league. And so it really is a league that is kind of, again, co-founded by players in Brianna Stewart and Nafisa Collier. And again, players are all owners invested in the league. And we heard a lot of players throughout the season talk about that investment making a difference, that they all wanted to make it succeed, not just because they wanted to make it succeed, but also they were financially motivated to make it succeed. As it relates to Clark, kind of bringing it a full circle a little bit, like we had someone make the point that, she wanted to receive the maximum amount of value or the closest salary to what she is worth to a league, Well, maybe Unrivaled is the place to do that, because that is a league, that is a context that does not oblige by salary cap restrictions. And we should say the WNBA is currently a hard cap league. That factors into, why the salaries are the way they are. Caitlin Clark can just make whatever, the league executives at Unrivaled deem she is worth and want to pay her. And that is true not just of Caitlin Clark, but that is true of all players across the women's basketball space. And if you think about what Unrivaled did as they actually doled out salaries, like, they made these choices. Like, they kind of engaged in the exercise that Sabreena and I were trying to report out. They tried to see, okay, what is a player worth, right? What is their social media presence? How much do brands engage with them? Who are their partners? How much merchandise do they move? When they are on basketball cards, how do the basketball cards, sell?
Right.
When they play in WNBA games, what are the WNBA's viewership? Like, these are some of the factors that they looked at as they were putting together and figuring out these agreements with players. They then did that, and they also offered them equity. It's why, it is such an interesting... It's not the opposite of the WNBA, but it's just interesting that players have this alternative in this moment, that there is such an important negotiation going on.
Absolutely. I can't directly, pinpoint Sephora's presence in the WNBA this season directly to Unrivaled, but I'm gonna just say I hadn't seen Sephora in women's sports really before.
They
I
had
saw
not
the
been, Zena. They had not been. Yeah.
There
That's
we
their
go,
first
right?
investment
When
was
the
Unrivaled, yeah.
Sephora refs, this, I mean, it was so brilliant. So brilliant to turn zebras into Sephora bags, basically. And now you're seeing them all over. The Sephora Performance Center, of course, with the Golden State Valkyries, their big deal with the New York Liberty. Like, they're everywhere. You're seeing them all over the W. The last point I'll say on the subsidizing, I think there are several folks that think about the NBA subsidizing the WNBA in the way that you may have remembered growing up. There were kids that may not have been able to afford their school lunch, and the county subsidized it. Or maybe there was like a really big field trip and it was really expensive for students to be able to go. And so the museum or wherever you went subsidized it. Those were charitable acts. There was no real investment or return for them other than to be able to provide a child with the opportunity to do something, have something that they couldn't have. I love the NBA. Their charitable arm is the foundation. Okay? That's where they do their charitable works. This is not a charity. When you think about business, a subsidizing, it's subsidiaries. The number one example I can give to close this out, Microsoft subsidized Xbox for years. PlayStation subsidized their console. What is that? The PS5, all the PSs, because the consoles as a product were too expensive to pass on the cost to the consumer. The actual hardware was so expensive. And so they subsidized the cost of that hardware by $100, $200 so that it was easier for the consumer to buy. Why? Because they knew that once they had the hardware, Microsoft, PlayStation could make up the subsidization of that product in the games, in the headwear, in the entire ecosystem around the hardware. Same thing with the NBA and the WNBA. A lot of these things are subsidized, whether it's the gym, whether it's the operations, whether it's teams sharing personnel. That's fine. They're going to make it up on top with the ticket sales, with the merch sales, with all the other things. And so I think that's what we have to remember. It is still a business, folks. And so it definitely, I love the way Sabreena put it, it behooves them.
Well,
Okay, SAT word. I love
it's
that.
It's not a fluke too that you see so many of these NBA owners wanting to invest in WNBA teams, right? I have a story that just went up on the site earlier this week about what will be different in Detroit and Cleveland this time around in the 2.0 version. If you think about Gordon Gunn, he was the original He was the original owner of the Cleveland Rockers, right? And so basically, original franchises in the W were also owned by NBA owners. A lot of original owners in the NBA basically got in because they were told it was like the right thing to do. And there was a time in which the WNBA, was on life support, like was trying to figure out Will it exist? Will it sustain? I had LA Sparks GM Reagan Cleveland. She played for the Rockers in 1998. She told me, there was that period of time where people felt it was the right thing to do, but now people realize this is a business and the intention to be profitable is a focus as well, right? There is a reason why so many of these billionaires are getting involved in women's basketball, because they recognize that there is a high potential for a significant return on investment. Mark Davis, who owns the Las Vegas Aces, he also owns the Las Vegas Raiders in the NFL. He purchased the team, in 17, 18 range for, we're talking single millions of dollars, right, Sabreena?
2021.
2021. Okay, 2021. He purchased from MGM for single millions of dollars. They'd already moved, from Texas to Las Vegas, I guess, in 2018. Now that team is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Claire Wu Tsai and Joe Tsai, the owner of the NBA's Brooklyn Nets, they purchase, that franchise, I think reportedly around in the, we'll say low tens, I want to say 10 to 14-ish millions of dollars. That franchise, and I reported this earlier this summer, they sold a minority stake in the team at a $450 million valuation. They expect to be the first, or they hope to be, $1 billion franchise, probably not too long, in the 2030s. They could be that. That's a significant return on investment. There is a reason why that these owners, again, Dan Gilbert's an NBA owner, Tom Gores, who, is now the WNBA Detroit owner, also owns the Pistons. There are all these NBA owners who want in because they see it as an opportunity to put a little bit in and know that in a couple years' time, that value, that investment is going to be much more. It is very much a business that they view as a profitable one in the long term.
I mean, if you are an owner that owns your arena, you don't think you want to put that to use during the summertime? This is, if you guys hear me, I don't know if our producer is going to just cut my heavy breaths that I keep having as Sabreena and Ben kind of lay this out. I promise you, it's not because I'm frustrated with them at all. It's because I am frustrated that this message and how they're beautifully laying it out hasn't been, I think, clearly laid out to everyone as to why this makes sense and also why it's so pertinent to get it done and get it done now in the midst of this boom. It's so important to rectify this before it gets too far gone. Ben, Sabreena, oh, my heart is happy. My little business heart is happy. I appreciate you guys doing this story. And as we started this, of course, it's around Caitlin because she's the most visible component of this story, but it's so much deeper than that. Of course, there are tons of players that are involved in this revenue push and why the value of this league, the value of this space, the value of women's sports is pushed by these individual players coming together, and that's why they got to come together and figure this out. Whew, we'll keep you posted on everything CBA. Keep talking to us, ask us questions on social media about it because, as you can tell, I'm a little passionate about it. And Sabreena and Ben definitely have their comments on their stories open. Check it out on the site. All right, guys, it's Friday. That means it is time to set your screens. Presented by BetMGM. Make a fast break for encore action with the WNBA Odds Boost token. Use your token to get a bigger payout on a winning WNBA bet. All right, y'all. I'm going to tell you what I'll watch first, and I'm going to ask you guys what games you're getting into this weekend. So at the time that we're recording this, the Connecticut Sun just beat Seattle by 10. Tina Charles went off for 29 points and 11 rebounds. Her UConn young'un, Olivia Nelson-Ododa, added a little bit more, 16. I'm looking at Seattle like, how? What happened? What's going on? Well, don't worry. At the time this show is dropping, they're going to have an opportunity to play again. So very interested to see how that rolls out. And then, of course, Golden State taking on the Aces, this time at their house, but still on national television. We know what happened when the national audience was watching this game last time. So I'm trying to see what the Aces are about in redeeming themselves. What games are you guys watching?
Well, maybe it's because of all of the Caitlin talk, but I am interested in Dallas, Indiana on Sunday. Caitlin Page crossing our fingers for the first time. I think that should be a good one.
Oh, yeah, for sure. What about you, Ben?
I'm interested in Atlanta and New York on Sunday afternoon.
Oh,
The Dream, have some big
yeah.
games coming up. They will play Indiana on Friday, and then they will play New York, who is looking to continue to build some momentum on Sunday in, a very big game. Can I also mention, too, Zena, for all those going to that game in New York, there is a really great public art installation right outside of Barclays
Oh,
Center. This
I
famous
saw
artist.
that.
Yeah. There's
Tell
an
us more.
artist,
What is it?
Latoya Ruby Fraser is her name. She's a famous artist, and basically, it is a series of portraits that the Liberty and her kind of work together to commission and put out. These 9-foot pillars that on one side is a portrait of each of the players from last year's championship team. I think there are 2 more still in the works. And on the other side are personal photos, family photos with chosen family, players and family members, as well as like accompanying essays and testimonials that, in some cases, members of their family actually wrote, and they're incredibly personal. The essays are very good. They're short, and the art is just right outside the arena. So give yourself a couple extra minutes. I think it's the first of its own time kind of project. It's a very cool project just to walk around, see it. If you're around Barclays Center at night, they're well lit. You can read them then too.
That's
give
cool.
yourself a couple extra minutes if you are going to that game to check out what is in front of the arena.
I love it. All right, we're talking hoops, we're talking business, we're talking culture and art. I love that. And I did see some glimpses of that installation. I'm very jealous of those that are going to be able to get to see it all in person. So definitely take a moment to stop by that. Thank you, Ben, for that. All right, guys, that is all we've got for you today. Next week, ahead of All-Star Weekend, we've got a special week planned. We will have an episode dropping every day from Tuesday to Friday. So get ready, charge those AirPods, make sure your headphones are good for the gym. You've got one every day between Tuesday and Friday. And as always, before you go, if you haven't already, please follow our show. Follow it on Pod, follow it on the YouTube, wherever you are right now, follow it. We want to look like we're cool because we are. Did you not hear this conversation we just had? Like, we're so smart and we're helping everybody understand things. Like, go follow it so other people will follow you because you're a cool kid. And that's what it's about, okay? You're a cool kid. All right. Now, we also want to make sure that you guys head on over to our partner, Yahoo Sports Hub. More content, sports.yahoo.com, women's sports. Whew. Every week. Is someone keeping a tally? I don't know how I do on that every week, but I think I'm on the winning side. Anywho, on behalf of The Athletic, Ben and Sabreena, I'm Zena Keita, thanking you for listening, and we will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to No Offseason. To hear more, be sure to like and subscribe. We drop new episodes every Tuesday and Friday.